Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel, Fish Den 365. I'm Den Haring. Today we're going to talk about some line management on our spools, on our reels. And we're going to show you what I do with managing my line and how I get the most out of my line. So, as most of you know, I use braided line on almost every setup that I have. And then I use either a fluorocarbon or a monofilament leader. But what you may not know is I do not fill the entire spool with braided line. I put a backing on first so that I don't have to waste a bunch of braided line that I'll never use. So what I do is on the bottom of the spool, I put monofilament, usually 10-pound test, cheap monofilament, the cheapest I can find. Because it's never, my intention is never to get down into that part of the spool. I like to use 10-pound test when I use this backing because I found that if I use heavier line, which you need less of it, you have spacing between the line because the diameter of the line is bigger. So I like 10-pound test because the spacing is such that it goes smoothly on the spool all the way across. And when I put my braid on there, it doesn't sink into gaps between those line loops. The loops are solid all the way across. So 10-pound test works really well for me as my backing. And then once I have that backing, once I have enough of that backing on, and I usually do this just by sight, by looking at where it is on the spool. I wish I knew what the actual length is because you'll understand in a minute. When I put the braided line on, I put 75 yards of braided line on. I have a line counter that I use to count the line as it's going on, and that's 225 feet is 75 yards. So I put 225 feet on, and that's how I know that I have the right amount of line, the right amount of braided line on my reel. And so depending on the pound test of what I'm using for my backing and the pound test of the braided line, it changes a little bit. The other thing that I need to mention here is I like to fill the spool not all the way to the tippy top. I usually leave about a 16th, somewhere between a 16th and even up to an eighth of an inch, usually closer to a 16th of an inch of space between the top of the spool and where the line comes. And the reason why I do that is I find that for me, I'm much less likely to backlash when I'm in that situation, when I'm using the line that way and not overfilling. Because you have a tendency to overfill the spool, and then if you do get a backlash or a bird's nest, it's a mess. So I keep about a 16th, a very small 16th of an inch space between the top of the spool and the line, and that prevents all that. And if you might say, well, why don't you do even further? Well, if you go down too far, if you don't fill it up far enough, then you're losing some speed in your reel, right? Because the spool is a certain diameter. And so if you have an 8.1 to 1 reel, you might find that when one full rotation of the reel handle might take in, let's say, 29 inches of line. Well, if you didn't have a full spool, if it was only a half spool, it's not going to take in 29 inches of line because the spool is not totally full. So you want to go up to where you can, 16th, eighth of an inch, something like that, where you don't get the backlash, but you still get the benefit of having a good high speed reel, high speed reel if you want a high speed reel. All right, so you might remember in another video I talked about using electrical tape as a visual indicator. This tells me, looking at this black tape, that this line on this reel, I've used it twice already. And what I do is I reverse the line once each year. This is on the reels that I use a lot. If I'm not using the reel very much, I'll let it go longer. But these rods and reels, I've got three of the exact same rod, and the reels, these two are identical, and the third one has a very similar reel with the same size spool. And I use these for a number of things. I like this rod for top water, for twitching jerk baits, even for throwing a spinner bait, and also I like it for all the spoon and the blade bait fishing that I do, and rattle traps, lipless crankbaits as well. So I get a lot of usage out of these rods. And so these reels I use a lot. So I'll use 1 year, and then I will reverse the line. So the line that's on the bottom of the spool will end up on the top, and we'll show you how to do that. But when I have a situation like this, with one that this line has to come off completely because it's been 2 years, I've used both sides of the braid. This one, though, I don't have the tape on there, which tells me that the bottom of the braid is good line. So the way I'll approach this is I'll take this off and put this one onto here. So that way I don't have to do so many iterations of putting line on reels or spools before I get it back on. So let me show you what we do there. I have a way of making this faster, and we'll show you how I do that. So I want to take all of the braided line off of this particular rod and reel here. And so what I'll do is I'll take a drill and a paper towel roll. Fits over there real nicely. And then I'm going to wrap the line around here a few times. And you'll see that it'll come right off the reel, right onto here. So I just engage the spool. And I take the line off. A lot faster and easier than me pulling it with my arms and hands. All right. So now I'm down to my backing. So I will just simply cut it at the knot. And we got the line off of this reel. We can put this down for now. And now it's just a matter of putting it onto this one, or I'm sorry, putting this line onto this reel. So I have to prepare this first because this still has a leader on it. So let me cut the leader off here. All right, so we got that all set up. So then it's just a matter of setting these up so I can tie that line from this reel, because the good line on this reel is at the bottom, right? So when we take this off this reel, it'll end up on the top of this reel. And all I do is tie a real simple knot, because again, I never intend to get to the backing here. If I'm using this rod and reel for the right application, then I'll never get to the backing. So what I do is I just tie a real fast double uni knot, or uni to uni knot, but I only do 2 loops. Make it go down, tighten it. Even 2 loops is pretty tight when the diameters are similar. You can see it's not slipping, and I'm pulling pretty hard there. This is the next part here. What I do is I cut this down very, very tight to the knot, because I just don't want a big lump on the spool. I don't want a big lump on the spool. All right. So now we just simply engage the spool on that one, and we're just going to reel it onto this one. And I use my fingers to put tension on the line. And I like to make sure that it's going on the spool evenly across. So I will guide it sometimes by pulling on it with my hand or finger. And you're going to see, if you look at this color now, you'll see it's very pale. But it's going to turn chartreuse because the newer part of the line is going on there. It's already turning color because the newer line is getting on here now. See how that's changing color. Almost there. And there we have it. So now it's as though we've got a brand new spool of line on that reel. Look how green that is, because it's never been used. And that tape told me that. So now what I'll do, because it's winter, is I will take this reel off the rod. I'll clean up the rod and I'll clean up the reel. What I do with the rod is I just take a warm washcloth and warm water and I just wipe the rod down. I'll use something a little more abrasive on the cork handle. I might use a sponge that has a little of that abrasiveness on it, and I'll use dish soap, and I'll just get the handle real clean. It doesn't take much. You can even use real light grit sandpaper if you wanted to. And then it already has the tape on there. I'll probably pull it off and put another one on, but this tape needs to be on here again, because after this year, this reel will need its line replaced, because the bottom half is already used. The top half will be used after this year. And that's how I use this as a visual indicator for what's going to happen. So now what we'll do is I'll end up putting new braid on this one, and this one will be good for 2 years because the new braid will be good on top. I'll reverse it next year and we'll be good to go for another year. And then once I reverse it, this will get the black tape to let me know. It'll be my visual cue. So that's my little system. Now what I want to show you next is, well, what if you don't have two reels that are identical like that? How do you go about changing the line? So I have another rod there, and I'm going to show you what I do. I use a couple of empty reels to put the line onto, and then again on. So I'll reel that line off of here, and what will happen is the good line will be on the top of this. But then when I go to put it on the reel that's on the rod again, it would be opposite. So then I use a second reel, put it on there, and then go back to the reel on the rod. We'll show you what I mean in a few minutes. All right, so here I have another rod and reel, and you can see I've got the black tape here, which is indicating to me that this line has to come off and get replaced with entirely new line. So we'll go back to our drill, gauge the spool, wrap it around here a few times. And off it comes. All right, we'll cut it off. All right, so this reel takes 20-pound test braid, and one thing I always make sure of is when I buy this line, I get it in a 150-yard spool or a 300-yard spool. 150-yard spools are hard to find. They're usually 125. But because I'm doing 75 yards at a shot, 125 only gives me one spool full and then not enough for the next spool. A 300-yard spool, though, will give me 4 spools. That's 4 75-yard spools. So I like to buy the 300 yards, and this will last me a long time. I can fill 4 reels with it, and I'll be good for a couple of years with that line. So the first thing to do is to attach it to my reel. And I'm going to do what I did last time, which is just double uni knot, 2 loops, and that's all. And we're going to cut that down real close to the knot. All right, then we're ready to spool on 225 feet of line, which is 75 yards. Get this set up so that we can show you what we do here. All right, so we're going to put our line counter on the rod, reset it to 0, tighten it up on here, and I want to get it so that the braid goes into the line counter. Here's the start of our braid. There we go. I usually like to hold the rod up at an angle. Make sure we're at 0 here, and we'll get started. Trying to put it on as evenly as possible. And you might notice this line is white. Previously I was using yellow line, but white line I can see very well as just as well as yellow. So I like the white as well. In fact, this new white line has a tendency of casting a little bit better than the stuff I used to use. So I'm at 156. As far as the feet, we're going for 225, 207. 224, and we're at 225, 226 in that range right there. So we can take our line counter off. All right, and you can see We now have a full spool of line. Just needs the leader tied onto it. And we've got 75 yards on there. It's ready to go. So now I got a reel that I want to reverse the line on. The line on top has been a year old. What's underneath has got a year left on it yet. It's brand new underneath, so I just want to reverse the line. We'll show you what we do to do that. I'm going to first pull off the leader because I don't have any need for that to be on the end of the line here. So I got about a 2 rod length worth of leader that we'll cut off. Now we know that we have the right amount of line already on here. All we have to do is flip the line around because we have backing underneath there. So what I'm going to do is take another reel. Now, if you don't have a reel, if you don't have another reel or a couple reels to do this with, you could always take a paper towel roll and wind the line around the towel roll, and then you can wind it back off when you want to put it onto another roll and then put it back on the reel. But if you have an extra reel or two, it makes it a lot easier because we'll just reel it onto this spool. And I don't even tie any knots here. What I do is I will, if you see there's holes in that spool, I'll just put this line through my line guide here and then let it go through one of these holes. I'll fish it through one of these holes in the reel, and sometimes this takes a little time. If you can have it come out the other side, I'll take these off because they're falling off anyway. If you can have it come out the other side on the reel through one of the other holes, then it makes it easier, but sometimes that's a little difficult to do. This line needs to get straightened out here, so bear with me while I attempt to get this in. There we go. Now right now I got it to come through with the other hole. So now all I got to do, I'm going to put these glasses back on, is reel the line onto this spool. So here I go. I'm just reeling it on. It's coming out off the spool that's on this rod. Getting all the old line now coming off, and now we're getting to the newer line. It's much greener. You'll notice this in a little bit. Almost there. There we go. Okay, so there's the end of it. So we're just going to cut it. Now I can't put this line back on the reel that I want to use because the new line would go to the bottom of the spool again. So what I have to do is transfer this line yet again to another reel or to something like this, but because I have a couple extra reels here, I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm going to put this line through this through the guide and through the holes in here and reel this braided line onto this reel. And then when I have the braided line on this reel, I will tie a knot to the reel that's on my rod and finally put it back on the rod, and the fresh line will be up on top. So we'll do that right now. All right, so we got it on there. Now we're just gonna reel it off of here onto here. So now this will end up having the old line up on top again on this reel, and then we'll tie it to the reel that we want to use, reel it onto there, and then the fresh line will be up top. And there we have it. So now we've got the old line up top. We'll put this reel to the side, and then we're going to do our double uni knot to attach these lines. Again, I'm just going to use 2 loops here. It'll go quick, and as long as I have enough backing on the reel, there's no reason to change the backing. I never intend to get down there anyway, so we can just leave that on there and save the cost of additional line that way. Alright, so now we're ready to do the final spooling onto the reel that we want to use, which is right here. Sometimes I like to tighten the spool adjust knob a little bit, because if it's too loose and you let go, the spool will tend to, when you have this button activated and you let go, if the spool is real loose, it'll tend to spin and the line will come off. But if I tighten that up a little bit, that's not as likely to happen, and it just gives me better control I can loosen that up again when I'm ready to start casting. So I'm just going to start to reel this line from one reel to the next. And I'm just going to make sure that I'm guiding it on here the way that I want it by using my fingers. And I use my fingers to create tension on the line so that it goes on the spool evenly. And there we have it. We're all ready to go. We got our line on there the way we want it. We just need to put our leader on and then attach our lures, our baits, and we're good to go. So that's how I manage my line from year to year and prepare for the next year, and always make sure that I have fresh line where it matters, to the bait and to the fish. It's a pretty simple thing to do. You can use tape to let you know where you are. So the next thing I'll be doing with this rod is adding, first I'm going to clean up the rod and clean the reel, but when I'm done, I'll put a piece of black tape around here, and that'll tell me that next year this has to come off and I have to replace it with fresh line. If I had no tape, I know I have another year left and I just flip the line around. So marking this will tell me what I need to do with it next year, and that's how to use visual management to make you a more efficient fisherman. Well, I hope you liked the video. If you did, give me the thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We have a lot of good content coming up here. I'm going to be sharing with you my bait finesse system rod and reel very soon. I got a Top Water Tuesday coming up that you'll be wanting to see. We got some good stuff coming up on Fish Den 365, so stay tuned here. Be safe out there, and as always, may God bless your fishing endeavors.